We are now live and the presentation will begin momentarily.
Hello, and welcome to the virtual public hearing for the Brent Spence Bridge Corridor Project. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jody Heflin, and I'm with HNTB, which is one of the engineering firms that's been working for KYTC and ODOT as they evaluate the environmental effects of the project. And I'm going to be giving a presentation where we go over a brief project history and overview, and then we're going to dive in and talk about the impacts of the project, as well as measures to offset those impacts and provide additional benefits. But before we get started, I do want to go over a couple of housekeeping items to make sure that everyone knows how to participate. So all of the information that I'm about to discuss is provided in the virtual public hearing participant guide. And that guide is posted in the documents section of the public input website that you use to access this hearing. And you can refer back to it at any time. So throughout this hearing, audio for everyone but the person who is actively speaking is going to be muted to reduce background noise and to ensure that everyone can hear the presentation. If you're having trouble hearing us, or if you're hearing a lot of static or garbled speech, we suggest that you change your audio connection. For example, if you're connected through your computer, you can try connecting by phone. If you are connecting to audio by phone, please keep in mind that there will be a slight delay between what you hear and what you see on the screen. You can also change your video settings to enhance the quality by clicking on the settings or the gear icon found at the bottom right of your screen. If you can see the image on this slide, it's where the number 1 is pointing. In those settings, if you select a higher number, the video will be a higher quality. If you're having connectivity issues, you might try closing out of other applications or turning off other devices around you. And also, if you're not seeing the presentation or if your screen freezes, please try refreshing your browser. And I'd also like to go over a few ground rules. So these are formal hearing proceedings. So we're not going to be responding to any comments or answering any questions during this presentation. After this presentation is over, representatives from KYTC and ODOT are going to be receiving formal spoken comments about the project. And we'll discuss how you can make one of those comments when we get to that part of tonight's hearing. But if you plan to call in with a comment, please make sure to limit your comments to 2 minutes. And also be aware that KYTC and ODOT aren't going to be responding to any comments or answering any questions at that time either. They will be formally responding in writing to all comments at the end of the comment period for the supplemental environmental assessment. Also, there's a chat box located on the right-hand side of your screen. The chat feature for this hearing has been set to be viewed by only the project team, but you may type comments into the chat at any time during this hearing and click the comment button. Comments that we receive in the chat will be included in the project record as written comments. And lastly, we want everyone to be aware that this hearing is being recorded and all of the comments are considered part of the hearing record. A video of tonight's presentation is also going to be posted to the public input website after this hearing is over. Okay, so now that we've gotten all our housekeeping and ground rules out of the way, let's get started by talking about how we got where we are today. So planning for the Brent Spence Bridge Corridor project began 20 years ago in 2004 when KYTC and ODOT began formally studying ways to improve I-71 and I-75 in Kentucky and Ohio. And through extensive study and public involvement, they identified one preferred alternative that we're calling Selected Alternative I. And Selected Alternative I received environmental approval in 2012. Now, since 2012, KYTC and ODOT have been studying ways to improve the project's design, to reduce impacts and costs, and to provide additional benefits. And those studies have culminated in a suite of refinements that we're calling Refined Alternative I. Now, in 2021, the states began preparing a supplemental environmental assessment, and they went through an extensive process of updating all of the environmental studies from that original approval. And they also updated the impact analysis to reflect Refined Alternative I. And the information in that supplemental environmental assessment is what we're presenting here tonight. The purpose and need for the project was established very early in that study process, around 2006, and it has not changed. The purpose and need for the project is to improve traffic flow and level of service, which is a measure of how well traffic moves through the corridor. It's to improve safety and to correct geometric deficiencies such as narrow shoulders. And it's also to maintain connections to key transportation corridors. Now, there are several key design elements that have not changed since that original environmental approval. Refined Alternative I does not change the layout of the main line highway through the project area. It also doesn't add or change the number of lanes. And it continues to provide a collector-distributor roadway system. And we're going to discuss a little bit more about what that is in just a few slides. What Refined Alternative I does do is it reduces the project footprint and therefore its impacts. It improves how the project will operate, and it does all of that without creating any substantial new or increased impacts. So let's discuss the key features of Refined Alternative I. It's going to widen 7.8 miles of I-71 and I-75 beginning at Marshall Avenue in Ohio and stretching all the way down south of Dixie Highway in Kentucky. And in that stretch of roadway, every overpass bridge and interchange is going to be rebuilt. The project's also going to add a new collector-distributor roadway system from around Ezard Charles Drive to south of 12th Street in Kentucky. Now, a collector-distributor roadway system is a system of roadways that are built parallel to the interstate and therefore local traffic. Sometimes you actually hear them called local lanes. And the way they work is that if you're on the interstate and you would like to access a local street, first, you're going to exit onto a collector distributor road, and from there, you're going to be able to access the local streets. And it works the same in the other direction. If you're on a local street and you'd like to access the interstate, you're first going to enter onto one of the collector distributor roads, which will funnel you up onto the interstate. And the purpose is to reduce the number of places where people are getting on and off of the freeway to preserve traffic flow and safety. Project's also going to extend existing frontage roads along Bullock Street and Simon Kenton Way to improve north-south connectivity in Covington. And it's going to build another set of collector distributor lanes between Kyles Lane and Dixie Highway in Kentucky. Now that existing Brent Spence Bridge is going to be rehabilitated and have some repairs made on the structure. Now, many of you know that today Both decks of that bridge have 4 lanes with no shoulders. So refined alternative I is going to restripe both the upper and the lower decks to provide 3 lanes with inside and outside shoulders. And the existing Brent Spence Bridge is going to become part of that collector distributor roadway system, and it's going to move local traffic across the Ohio River. Now, immediately to the west, we're going to build a brand new double-decker companion bridge. And that bridge is going to have 5 lanes on each deck, and it's going to move interstate traffic across the river. Now, the exact design of that new companion bridge hasn't been determined yet, but there are 2 bridge types currently under consideration. The first is an arch bridge, and this is what a standard arch bridge would look like. And the second is a cable stay bridge, and this is what a standard cable stay bridge would look like. Now, the final bridge type is going to be determined based on a technical analysis by the design team. And regardless of the design that's ultimately chosen, KYTC and ODOT are going to work with that designer to make sure that that new bridge is both iconic and visually stunning. And KYTC and ODOT are going to continue coordinating with an aesthetics committee that's been established for the project to obtain local input on the design and the appearance of that bridge. Now, all of those improvements that we just outlined are estimated to cost $3.6 billion, and that includes all costs to deliver the project, from planning all the way through to the end of construction. Now, the project is going to be built in 3 phases. And I want you to be aware that in this graphic, north is to your right. Okay, so phase 1 is going to begin at Marshall Avenue and is going to go to Finley Street in Ohio. Phase 1 is currently under design and construction is expected to begin in 2029. Phase 2 is shown in red. It's going to begin at Finley Street and stretch to Lynn Street in Ohio. Phase 2 is also currently under design, and construction is expected to begin in 2026. Now, the remaining 6 miles of the corridor are shown in blue here, including that new companion bridge, are going to be delivered using a progressive design build contract. And construction on phase 3 is expected to begin in 2025, although you could see some limited activity beginning in late 2024. So that progressive design build contract, it presents a unique opportunity for the design build team to develop further innovations for the design of that southern 6 miles of the corridor. Now, refined alternative I represents the base design, and that's what's being evaluated in the supplemental environmental assessment and what we're presenting at this hearing. But KYTC and ODOT are going to evaluate innovation concepts that are developed by the design build team and concepts that improve project quality, shorten schedule, reduce costs, support project goals, and have support at the local level may be incorporated into the project. So the design build team is currently working through an innovation period where they're developing dozens of refinement options, including ideas that have been generated through coordination with local municipalities and through public comments that we've received over the last couple of years. And those concepts are being evaluated right now for constructability and cost. And KYTC and ODOT are going to be spending the next several months vetting feasible suggestions with local municipalities. And they also want the chance to review comments that come in through the comment period for the supplemental environmental assessment before making any final decisions. So right now, based on the current project schedule, the project team expects to be sharing refinements around May of this year. Okay, so that takes us through a description of the project, and now we're going to change gears a little bit and we're going to discuss the impacts of that base design, refined alternative I, on both the human and the natural environment. So that supplemental environmental assessment, it, it evaluated potential impacts in over 30 resource areas. And KYTC and ODOT have diligently worked to avoid and minimize impacts as much as possible. And as a result, only minor impacts are expected in the majority of the areas that were studied. And net benefits are expected in several areas, such as how the corridor will look once it's built, or community cohesion. So we're going to take the next couple slides, maybe several slides, and we're going to discuss the more notable impacts of refined alternative I. And we're going to start by just walking through what we expect those impacts to be. And then we're going to circle back around and we're going to discuss measures to offset those impacts, as well as to provide additional benefits. So let's start with land acquisition. 51.2 acres of additional land will be acquired to build the project. And that includes relocating 4 residences and the partial relocation of 1 business and the full relocation of 24 commercial properties and businesses. Everyone who needs to move for the project is going to receive relocation benefits from KYTC and ODOT. And also, of those 24 commercial relocations, one of those is a radio tower in Kentucky. And 14 of those 24 business relocations are tenants in areas of Longworth Hall that are going to be impacted by construction in Ohio. And all of those tenants have been provided the opportunity to relocate to other available office space inside Longworth Hall if that's what they would like to do. In 2022, KYTC began acquiring land in Kentucky under that original environmental approval, and KYTC has already contacted the majority of impacted property owners in Kentucky. Now, they haven't yet begun acquiring land in Lewisburg. After the supplemental environmental assessment receives final approval, KYTC is going to begin contacting impacted property owners in Lewisburg and begin the land acquisition process in that area. ODOT began acquiring land in Ohio in 2014, also under that original environmental approval. And ODOT's already acquired 70 of the 79 parcels needed to build the project in Ohio. And they've already relocated 5 of those 24 businesses that we talked about 2 slides earlier. ODOT is continuing to acquire the remaining parcels, and they've already contacted all impacted property owners. So now let's talk a little bit about some impacts to the natural environment. Refined alternative I will permanently impact about 2.8 acres of wetlands and a little over 1,000 feet of streams. And the piers for that new companion bridge are going to impact about 350 feet of the Ohio River and portions of its floodplain. Now, all of those impacts that are listed here on this slide also require various state and federal permits and approvals. And KYTC and ODOT are going to make sure to obtain all those necessary permits and approvals before any construction begins that would impact those resources that are listed here. The project will also remove about 90 acres of vegetation that provides habitat for threatened and endangered bat species. Now, for the purposes of our environmental analyses, we call that forested habitat, but it includes a wide variety of trees and shrubs, some of them as small as 3 inches in diameter, and it even includes dead trees that are still standing. In the project area, A lot of the habitat that's going to be removed consists of trees and shrubs that have grown up right next to the highway. Those piers for the new companion bridge are also going to impact mussel habitat in the Ohio River. Noise studies that were prepared for the project concluded that the majority of the residential and recreational areas within 500 feet of the corridor will be impacted by increased traffic noise. And as is typical for such large projects, we do expect impacts during construction. We anticipate that traffic congestion is going to increase, and there could also be some potential additional impacts in terms of dust and air quality, noise, and sediment and erosion during construction activities. But these impacts will be temporary, and the project team is working to minimize them as much as possible. Refined alternative I is also going to have an adverse effect on two historic properties. The first is the Lewisburg Historic District in Kentucky. The project will remove 3 structures from that historic district, and 2 of those are historic as well. And it will also acquire small amounts of land from some other properties within the historic district. In Ohio, the project is going to remove about 204 feet from the east end of Longworth Hall. And I also want to make you aware that ODOT is currently in the process of purchasing the entire Longworth Hall building as a result of its negotiations with that property owner. And ODOT and KYTC plan to use some of the office space in that building and some of its exterior grounds during construction. But ODOT's ownership of the full building and its use of the inside and outside during construction aren't expected to have any further impacts to its historic integrity. So before we discuss impacts to parks, I want to clarify for this project, we have been treating 3 interconnected parks in Covington, Goble Park, Kenny Shields Park, and a small dog park as one large recreational complex that we're calling the Goble Park Complex. And Refined Alternative I is going to remove 2.84 acres of land from the Goble Park complex, as well as 360 feet of a walking trail and the basketball courts. At the Queensgate Playground and Ball Field in Ohio, ODOT acquired 0.72 acres of land under that original environmental approval. And in 2014, they provided funding to the city of Cincinnati to reconfigure those ball fields to make room for the project. So if you've been around for a little while, you might remember that there used to be 2 smaller ball fields at this location. But using that funding provided by ODOT, the city reconfigured them to provide that one all-star sized ball field that's there today. And they also added a playground. Refined Alternative I isn't going to have any additional impacts to the Queensgate Playground and Ball Field. During construction, ODOT's going to build either a noise barrier or a 10-foot chain link fence along the park highway boundary to fulfill its commitments from that original environmental approval. So that's the list of the more notable impacts of Refined Alternative I. So as I promised, now we're going to circle back around and we're going to discuss mitigation. So mitigation measures are measures that are already included in the project to offset those impacts that we just discussed. For example, KYTC is going to mitigate impacts to wetlands and streams by purchasing credits from sites that specialize in restoring wetlands and streams. Now, the exact acreage that will be restored is going to be finalized during that permitting process that I mentioned a little earlier, but it's typical that 3 to 4 acres are restored for every 1 acre that's impacted. The project's also going to include best management practices to control sediment and erosion to prevent further impacts to wetlands and streams, both during construction and after the project is built. And in Ohio, they're required to mitigate for water quality because of increased stormwater runoff. ODOT's been coordinating mitigation options with the sewer district and the Environmental Protection Agency in Ohio, and they will be finalizing those mitigation measures as the project moves through the detailed design process. Impacts to threatened and endangered species habitat are going to be minimized and mitigated by clearing only the trees and shrubs needed to build the project. And where trees and shrubs are removed, that's only going to happen during certain times of the year when those threatened and endangered bats don't typically use those habitats. KYTC is also going to make a contribution to the Imperiled Bat Conservation Fund, which is a program that specializes in conservation efforts for those species. And in the project area, all of the mussels in the Ohio River are going to be relocated to areas upstream of the project before any construction begins in the river. In terms of those construction impacts, KYTC and ODOT are committed to coordinating with local municipalities, agencies, and stakeholders to minimize those impacts as much as possible. They're going to prepare detailed traffic management, maintenance of traffic, and incident management plans to minimize disruptions. And you, the public, can expect frequent updates on construction activities so that you can plan accordingly during the construction process. The project team is also going to implement a dust control plan and measures to minimize diesel emissions, to monitor and protect air quality, to manage noise, and to control sediment and erosion during construction activities. And in Ohio, ODOT has committed to restoring local roadways that might be impacted by increased traffic during construction back to the condition that they were in before construction began. KYTC is going to mitigate those adverse effects to the Lewisburg Historic District by creating historic records of the structures that are removed. They're also establishing a $1.2 million grant that's going to be administered by the City of Covington to improve the facades of other structures within that district. And during construction, the project team is going to develop and implement a program to monitor and protect sensitive historic structures during construction activities that might produce a lot of vibration. And if that monitoring shows that damage has occurred, it will be repaired. ODOT is going to mitigate those adverse effects to Longworth Hall by installing new exterior storm windows along the entire building. And after those 204 feet are removed, they're going to rebuild that east wall to more closely resemble its original appearance. And windows that are removed are going to be restored and used in the reconstruction of that east wall. And if any windows are left over, and if there are any other materials that retain historic integrity, they're going to be stored on site so that they can be used in any future repairs or renovations on that building. ODOT's also going to repair bricks on the entire building and refurbish the lettering on top of the building. And you'll also see a new cornerstone and signs to explain the history of the building and its contribution to the history of the area. KYTC's been working with the City of Covington to develop mitigation measures for the Global Park Complex. And KYTC is going to provide $100,000 to the City of Covington to prepare a master plan for the Global Park Complex. KYTC is also going to rebuild that walking trail. And after the project is built, the area that is currently occupied by the 5th Street ramp is going to be freed up. And that's going to allow KYTC to return 2.23 acres back to Global Park in that area. So the net result is that the Global Park complex is going to be 0.6 acres smaller after the project is built. So to recap how the math works out, the project is going to remove 2.84 acres of land from the southwest corner of the complex. Now that land is low-lying and it does tend to flood. And it's going to be replaced with 2.23 acres of land in the northwest corner of the complex. Now, that land is at a higher elevation and it does not tend to flood. Other mitigation measures include KYTC providing funding to replace those basketball courts or to build a new comparable outdoor recreational facility, depending on what comes out of that master plan that the City of Covington is going to repair. KYTC is also going to fund the relocation of the outdoor pool or a comparable aquatic facility. Again, depending on the outcome of those master planning efforts. And finally, if the project requires those basketball courts to be removed before their permanent replacement is built, KYTC will provide additional project funds to relocate it on a temporary basis to another location within the complex. So the Federal Highway Administration intends to make a de minimis impact determination for the Global Park complex. Now, that's just a really fancy Latin way of saying that the impacts are minor in nature and that after we've considered avoidance, minimization, mitigation, and enhancements, they won't result in an adverse effect to the park. Now, members of the public can comment on the impacts to the Global Park complex as part of the comment period for the supplemental environmental assessment. And after that comment period is over, KYTC is going to obtain written concurrence from the City of Covington. And the Federal Highway Administration will make that final de minimis impact determination based on the outcome of the public comments and the concurrence from the city. So let's talk about noise barriers for a minute. Noise barriers have to meet a set of criteria that demonstrate that they are both feasible and reasonable before they can be proposed for construction. And both KYTC and ODOT have their own noise policies that define what those criteria are in each state. So, for instance, in Kentucky, KYTC is proposing 7 noise barriers that meet the requirements of their noise policy. Those noise barriers are shown in orange on this slide. They're generally on both sides of the interstate. They begin around 4th Street in Covington and they stretch down through south of Dixie Highway in Fort Mitchell. In Ohio, ODOT is proposing 5 noise barriers that meet the requirements of their noise policy. They're also shown in orange on this slide. They are all on the east side of the interstate and begin around Bank Street and stretch down through Dixie Highway. Sorry, I apologize. They stretch down through the Queensgate Playground and Ball Field. Thank you. Both ODOT and KYTC are going to be conducting additional public involvement with the property owners and tenants who will benefit from those proposed noise barriers. And each state is going to follow their own noise policies and how they go about that public involvement, but you can expect that it will be occurring during the detailed design portions of the project. Okay. Let's wrap this presentation up by discussing enhancements. Enhancements are measures that are also already included in the project to provide additional benefits to the surrounding communities. So, for example, I want to go straight back to noise. There were 2 locations in Kentucky that didn't quite meet all of the criteria in their noise policy, but KYTC has decided to go above and beyond its noise policy and propose barriers in those locations anyway. Those locations are shown in green on this slide. The first one is on the east side of the interstate and stretches from about 4th Street to Pike Street in the Main Strasse area of Covington. The second one is on the west side of the highway in the vicinity of Maple Avenue in Fort Mitchell. Now, because these barriers don't meet all of the criteria in KYTC's policy, we're calling them noise/visual screening barriers, but they will be the exact same construction as those 7 proposed noise barriers that we discussed under the mitigation section. KYTC's also heard some feedback that there's interest in some transparent noise walls in a few locations, and they're going to continue evaluating those options through that noise public involvement process. Another example of an enhancement is the work that's gone into improving the look of the corridor. KYTC and ODOT are going to continue coordinating with the Project Aesthetics Committee to develop a new companion bridge that's both iconic and aesthetically pleasing. And they're also going to develop aesthetic enhancements for the existing Brent Spence Bridge. And the states are going to continue coordinating with aesthetic subcommittees that have been established in Ohio, Covington, Fort Wright, and Fort Mitchell to finalize landscaping and streetscaping plans, gateway opportunities, and aesthetic treatments for various design features, such as bridge piers or retaining walls. And in Ohio, every overpass bridge is going to have translucent screen walls with lights on the inside of those panels. I think it'll look pretty cool as you're driving down the corridor. The project will also build new or rebuild existing sidewalks, shared use paths, and/or bike lanes on every local street that crosses the interstate in the project area, as well as several of the local streets that are parallel to the interstate. We expect that this will increase options for pedestrians and bicyclists and improve connections in the communities in the project areas. Another example of an enhancement is how ODOT worked with the city of Cincinnati to reconfigure the downtown ramps to open up about 10 acres of land that the city can then use for some potential redevelopment or open space. ODOT has also committed to building an additional 50 feet of green space on both sides of the Ezard Charles Drive Bridge that the city of Cincinnati can then use for some potential future civic space or retail development. Now, ODOT has committed to funding the design of that widened bridge, and they're going to share the cost of building it with the city of Cincinnati. In terms of stormwater, both KYTC and ODOT have committed to separating all interstate runoff from existing combined sewer systems in the project area. And modeling shows that that will substantially reduce the amount of water flowing into those existing combined sewer systems. KYTC has also committed to implementing measures to reduce flooding in the Pieselberg area. And both states are going to continue coordinating with local agencies and their respective sanitary and sewer districts to finalize stormwater details as they move through the final design of the project. And finally, for the progressive design build contract for that southern 6 miles of the corridor, KYTC and ODOT have committed to establishing goals for disadvantaged business enterprises to participate in both the design and the construction portions of that contract. And they're establishing an on-the-job training program and a workforce development plan. And a diversity and inclusion outreach committee has already been formed to provide feedback and to support those efforts. So we've done it. We've worked through the primary, more notable impacts of refined alternative I and the more notable mitigation measures and enhancement measures. You can review the entire complete environmental analysis, including a comparison to that original environmental approval and a comprehensive list of all the mitigation and enhancement measures in the supplemental environmental assessment. You can view the supplemental environmental assessment on the public input website that you use to access this hearing. And you can also look over some additional exhibits and handouts that are posted in the documents section of that website. Or if you prefer, you can read print copies in both the Covington and the West End public libraries. So we're getting ready to move into that formal public comment period that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. Before we do that, I just want to point out that calling in with a comment tonight is only one way that you can provide comments about the project. You can provide comments via all of the methods that are listed on this slide. And there's some additional detail provided in the Submit a Comment tab on the Public Input website. All comments, no matter how we receive them, receive equal weight in the project record. And KYTC, ODOT, and the Federal Highway Administration are going to consider and formally respond to all comments in writing before making a final decision on the supplemental environmental assessment.